Today we'll look at the British and Dutch empires during the time period of 1450 to 1750, with a primary focus being on 4.1 and 4.3. Really, truly, 4.3 is going to be really heavy in the initial development of these two empires for your key concept information. And so today we're going to start with looking at, as we normally do when we talk about 4.3.I, rulers using a variety of methods to legitimize and consolidate power. And this is really going to boil down to a discussion of the Dutch Empire, or trade empire as I will call it, and the British actual empire. So here's some visuals for you as far as scope and span. The British map on the right is misleading with the English colonies and stuff, because very shortly during the latter part of the time period, they're going to expand from just this territory. But for now, for the bulk of this time period, the English colonies in North America are their main focus, their empire. They will start expanding very quickly, however. The Netherlands, the Dutch there, illustrated in light green there in Northern Europe, they're going to spread eventually to all those places and form, once again, a maritime-based empire. Both of these are maritime-based empires. So don't get confused between that and land empires like we saw with Russia and the Ottomans and blah, blah, blah. So in the 17th century, we talk about the Dutch century here. Dutch, the Netherlands, very tiny, isolated area in Northern Europe. Once again, having to kind of compete against the other heavy hitters that are going on in Europe: France, Spain, Portugal, the British Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, which is a little bit further south. They're going to kind of be caught in the middle of all of this, and so they have to get kind of aggressive in certain regards when it comes to competition and competing on the global scale. The Dutch century here as a political model is one where you're going to see a loose federation here of like-minded, trade-based, radical attitude towards religion. They're going to be kind of unique in several regards here because they are so kind of to the north and isolated. They do have certain levels of religious toleration, however, which is a little bit unique. We've already looked at other empires that we've talked about that have not been religiously tolerant, which is kind of the reason why, for example, the Pilgrims come to America, because they're seeking religious, tolerance and all that kind of stuff. So you will see that a little happening towards this as well. Stable, thriving economy, that's the one thing that the Dutch have going for them. They've always had a stable, thriving economy. Some of those issues will be discussed later as well to kind of layer on to that. And then this is the golden age of artists and thinkers within this territory here of the Netherlands and the Dutch region. Lots of art and architecture and thinking parameters are coming out that are going to be utilized when we start talking about 4.2 and 4.1 when it comes to art. Religion and everyday life were reoccurring themes in their art. So take the papal, serious religious connotation of the Renaissance in Italy, and as you go further north and away from that papal center, you start becoming more and more open, and everyday life becomes more and more prevalent and featured, and religion as being more realistic instead of deep religious toned is also seen here. So as far as Dutch society is concerned, you got a couple of major cities there, Amsterdam and Rotterdam. They do have granary supplies that are going to be surplusing for years at a time. Generally, the Dutch have the higher salaries of any other parts of Western Europe. That includes some of the heavy hitters like Spain and England and France. Women especially had higher wages, which is really important to look at. And then, of course, the idea of the Protestant work ethic is going to be something that is going to be useful in your knowledge of social growth in places like North America. North America still today gets talked about with a Protestant-like work ethic, which means that not a lot of time taken away for frivolous activities. You do your job and do it with a determination here, whatever that job may be. Very thrifty and frugal. So that's, once again, common attributes there for the Protestant work ethic. And the highest standard of living of wage is going to also lead to the highest standard of living in Europe. So, typically that's going to be, pretty parallel. If you have more money that you're making on your job, you can live fancier. And we see both of those things happening in the Dutch society. here is a visual for you for the eventual Dutch economy. And as we see, once again, they're going to be a maritime-based empire that's going to spread outward through trade and through trade along the oceans. Major waterways that include this are pretty much every continent, North America, South America. They get into Africa with the Cape Town and going around the Cape. And then, of course, we know they get into Asia and Oceania there with New Holland. There are some regions where they're going to be heavily influenced, if not fully controlled, by the Dutch. So exporting of diamonds, linens, and pottery are going to be the main exports there. And what makes this process even easier for the Dutch is that there's very little inflation. Unlike other areas that dumped tons of precious metals into the economy, or vice versa, saw the removal of those precious metals, and therefore paper money isn't as valuable. The Dutch kind of control that pretty well with more direct trade and less indirect money bartering and all that kind of stuff. So much less inflation. And then, of course, there's a land reclamation project that is accelerated because this is a tiny area, and so they're going to try to expand their land borders there. That is picked up during this area. However, the main dominant characteristic of the Dutch economy is carrying trade. Once again, if they are not trading directly in certain goods, which are highlighted there for you in pink on this map, they are carrying trade, which means they're kind of like the UPS of the old world here. The lowest shipping rates in all of Europe are seen in this Dutch empire, and they will carry goods for other people if they can be hired to do so. So we'll see a lot of that here when we start expanding the Atlantic Circuit and the Columbian Exchange and all those kinds of ideas. So the Dutch politically are important because we start noticing that the Spanish Habsburgs and Europe are kind of getting into this kind of merger/consolidation type of a mindset. And as you can see by this map here, you've got a consolidation effort being done by Philip II at the end of the 16th century. Once again, leading us into the 17th century here, you're going to see a major drawing of the lines here between Austrian Habsburgs and the Spanish Habsburgs. They're in the same family through marriage, all that kind of stuff, so they don't want to get into it war-wise. So this is a really tricky situation here. And you can see there's the boundary there of the Holy Roman Empire, which is modern-day Germany and places like that. And of course, we know that the Dutch there, sitting at the top, are going to be influenced here by the Spanish Habsburgs. And so when they finally become independent from this process, you're going to see a reorganization here into the Dutch Federation. And the listings for how political power and stuff like that is monitored throughout this time is given for you here. You have regions who have provincial level control here. All the power is held by them. And of course, they are really going to be focusing on local independence, once again, from the Habsburg dynasty here. And then you have your stadholders there with your States General. Once again, that's kind of like your Congress there. And then a States General at the most basic level is an assembly that has certain powers. The main one here are for foreign affairs, like war, because war will be coming around the horizon with the 30 Years' War and issues like that. And of course, if push comes to shove, go to the local estates for local issues. So expanding from that, you've got, Roman numeral 4.3a, which is arts and political legitimization. And so for the most part, always think about Europe during this time period as being very one-sided. They don't want to kind of merge certain aspects of their culture with other cultures. Once again, religious toleration or lack thereof is a great example of this. Being closed-minded when it comes to the sharing of social dynamics with other cultural groups. You already saw a little bit of that with Spain and how they treated their natives in their empires over in the Western Hemisphere. And so the British and the Dutch, no secret to that and no strangers to that, are going to be doing things like appointing their own like-minded officials or, hiring translators to help negotiating that are going to help their needs. And then they do see a little bit of assimilation into culture, which, like I said, once again, we previously saw with religion is the big one. Customs and traditions, intermarriage does happen, although, once again, they're kind of trying to get away from that here to certain extents, at least at first. But how do we pay for all this? Because, these empires are trying to expand and do land reclamation projects and forge empires overseas. Well, that takes a lot of money. And so the best way we do that is seen by three different methods. One, joint stock companies, where we see costs of exploration and expansion divided amongst shareholders, kind of similar to what we do today with the stock market. If you want to own a piece of Coke and you want to have a say in how they make money or profit or change things, you buy a share, right? And if the more shares you have, the more power you have over that company. We see that with the Dutch East India Company, for example. Some expansion is paid for by the government, and so we see that in places that don't have joint stock companies involved. You do see some private enterprise, which is seen as well, where private wealthy people or wealthy groups or wealthy churches or whatever are trying to expand, and that they're financing their own way there. So you see all three during this time period when it comes to these empires. England and the Dutch are no exception to that rule. We see that there is a constant effort in Part B of rulers trying to use religious ideas to legitimize their rule. As part of the variety here, the big one here, and I put it all in bold for you, divine right of kings. Other areas use their own different religious ideas to legitimize rule. In Europe, they're using divine right of kings. And so for England and the Dutch, this is important because, what is divine right of kings? It's basically that, it's the old Egyptian pharaoh method there, that there's a monarch who is not subject to any other earthly authority, whether that is the Pope or any other, church dogma. They get their right to rule directly from the will of God. And therefore, once again, they're not subject to anybody on earth's authority, whether it be aristocracy or other estates or the people, forget the people. This is really included and seen as dominated by places like Protestant countries that are going to be reforming here very shortly, or during the reign of, say, for example, because we're in England and Dutch, Henry VIII, right, with the Catholic Church, where he basically breaks away, forms the Church of England with him at the head of it, and then, of course, in order to get different marriages and stuff sanctioned, he kind of allows himself to do that and gives himself divine right of kings. There are some other great examples of divine right of kings. You'll see that in France when we talk about France. Also, for this note here, one little thing, God is judging of these kings. So this is a really popular method of rule for kings that are, for lack of a better terms, really crappy. So unjust kings that rule can't really be checked and balanced with their power and authority, because the only person that can do that is God. And if God's not on earth right in front of them, that's kind of hard to justify for the lower classes to these kings. And now we're going to get into some of the heavier lifting stuff. You've got rulers with E using tribute collection and tax farming to generate revenue. Once again, companies are used to spread. Eventually that spread will look kind of like this at the beginning of this time period to that map in the left there, circa right around the 1700 time frame. You've got, of course, your initial spread there, North America. Once again, you already covered South America, so that should be no problem. And you know that the Portuguese especially, and a little bit of the Dutch, have been getting into Africa. That's about to kick up real soon here. And then, of course, with the Dutch East Indies. So what are we looking at there? You're looking at imperial expansion with Roman numeral 2. That's going to use a lot of technology to happen. So it goes beyond shipping technology and sailing technology and the compass and the astrolabe and all that kind of stuff. Now you're talking about ways of keeping those trade routes open and profitable. And that's going to happen through military. So you definitely will see a relationship between imperialism and spread and military technology. So, for example, rapid fire rifles, which give way to things like the machine gun at the very end of this time period. That kind of stuff is going to be happening. Cannons, which will become larger and heavier and be able to fire from further distances and will become more accurate. We have those things because we have gunpowder, right? So all that stuff's going to be very, very important for generating revenue and keeping those routes open. Looking at A, as far as that, it breaks down a little bit even further. You got to look at creating new global empires. So once again, the development and beginning of maritime trade routes, which once again kind of domino effect into advancements in technology. They kind of go hand in hand. Streamlined ship designs, for example, which can travel those waters quicker. It's all about money, and money is time. Time is money. You've heard that before. So your maritime trade routes, which are being discovered and refined, are made more profitable because of speed. And then, of course, the creation of joint stock companies, which we use to finance, are pretty innovative. We will see stuff like that happening with the stock markets and all that kind of stuff later on down the road. It's all about spreading out risk at this level because this is a very tricky, dangerous enterprise. And so think of like modern day insurance, like when your parents pay insurance for their house or for their car. They can pay insurance at a low rate because they share that risk with everybody. Not every company is going to be successful, just like not every car is going to get into an accident and need insurance, but enough of them pay insurance, that way the ones that do fail don't hurt the company line there. That's a business model that we will see later on down the road. Looking at Roman numeral 3 here for this, we have competition. Competition over trade routes and state rivalries is going to be important. And looking at things like maybe piracy in the Caribbean. Once again, we're trying to stick to England and the Dutch, so there are lots of other examples for this time period and this Roman numeral here for the French, Spanish, and Portuguese, and some of your land-based empires. But we're going to try to stick to our focus here. And then you have piracy once again. You have thievery, sanctioned thievery by the governments, and impressment of foreign citizens. So you will see not only the sinking of ships and the taking of cargo, but sometimes you will see the taking of the people that are on those boats and being drafted, so to speak, into the militaries of the host country that takes them over. Those are things that are going to be seen, once again, leading to competition and spreading out there. And then, of course, obstacles to empire building. There's lots of obstacles. We already talked about hostile natives with the Spanish and Portuguese and how they're dealt with, which is force and, unfortunately, elimination for that. Changing climates with storm seasons and monsoons, because these oceans are a little bit different when it comes to what they have to deal with there. You got to deal with the climate and weather patterns there, especially as we are still trying to figure out technological innovation. Disease with natural selection there, when it comes to certain immunities and diseases that are going to be spreading along maritime ships. We know the Black Death in the previous time period. It has been, now accepted by most Europeans that survived, and now they have immunities. Well, now there's other diseases too, like smallpox and all that kind of stuff that are going to be trading, malaria, blah, 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 as we start encountering more areas that have diseases that we're not immune to. And then finally, competing empires. France, England, Spain, Portugal, the Dutch, they are after largely the same amount of things, or the same kinds of things, like natural resources and money. And so that's going to lead to lots of conflicts, the main example of which is the 30 Years' War, which began with a famous event called the Defenestration of Prague, illustrated here by that little famous painting where officials threw another official of another country out of a window, out of a castle. That's called defenestration. And so when that happened in Prague, you kind of started your 30 Years' War, which was basically a war of succession here that happened in England. Not England, the Holy Roman Empire, sorry. You will learn more about that at great length during Euro, so look forward to that. It's pretty cool as far as a story and a situation involving a very major war over a long period of time. Getting into the British North America now with focus, when they start to actually get over and run, we're going to kind of go, dancing around different topics and themes here. The British are going to be ruling their territories in North America with a statute called salutary neglect, which is where they're going to be kind of avoiding strict enforcement of parliamentary laws. That's really good because it keeps the Americans happy until, of course, they start going back to that to get more money or whatever. And, of course, we know the result. We're going to have a civil war, an American Revolution here to kind of throw off those issues. Very few profitable resources. The two that are in North America that are really heavily profitable: timber, because we're outsourcing all of the timber now. We've kind of destroyed enough of it over in Europe where there's not that much to go through anymore. And fur, of course, animals. In the South, we start seeing the rise of cash crops like cotton and tobacco. They're going to follow other Western European forms of rule when it comes to treatment of natives or rising of different activities like manufacturing, merchant activity with trade, both local and external. And then, of course, interest in the Enlightenment will be really important for our founding fathers. So we know that's coming up around the corner with natural rights and all that kind of stuff. Of course, labor is a very important issue, so slavery will be brought in. By 1700s, in the British North American colonies, slaves make up roughly 23% of the population, which is going to lead to Roman numeral D there, the massive demographic changes in the Americas, resulting in new ethnic and racial classifications. Once again, in this case, slaves being at the very, very bottom, having replaced indentured servants and so forth. Social structure here will be copied with the idea of nuclear families, small, closely knit family groups, which will start expanding during the time period because of younger marriage. Once again, property is more readily available, so people feel they can get married sooner and not have as much risk there. We start seeing more and more child-centered families, so take that nuclear family and then now start expanding it by having more and more kids. Once again, more and more profit and more effort to make more money is kind of the idea there. A low mortality rate, which is 70 years of age. You'll start seeing that in the British North American colonies, which is pretty cool. So once again, once we get some things figured out there, we're going to start seeing some changes here, socially speaking. Big, heavy slide here as far as reading. Really boils down to B, C, and D here of Roman numeral 4.1.4, talking about global circulation of goods. And of course, different monopolies and commercialization and mercantilism here and global economy based around silver and all these kinds of things. So I'll let you read this slide, but really, truly, most of it is just basic key concept information, which is highlighted by a couple of key terms that you're going to have from your Quizlet sets, like, once again, mercantilism, commercialization, stuff like that. And then, of course, Atlantic system is another one, indentured servitude, slavery. Those things are going to start to combine the labor sources here and kind of merge these things together. Starting to wind down now. Once again, a basic brief slide here for mercantilism. I want to show you this because this is the basic triangle trade that is going to be very important. Once again, as a key term that you need to know, triangle trade is one of those terms, and I would make sure that you understand it and how that works. Basically, England is winning when it comes to, how should we put this lightly, trading versus their neighbors, right? Spain's interested in like silver and stuff like that, and gold. England is becoming more and more diversified with manufactured goods and slaves and manufactured goods going to Africa. So they're kind of expanding their horizons a little bit more rapidly than Spain is, and therefore England is winning. Spain is losing in that rise of capital. Meanwhile, in mainland Europe, you've got the rise of the Protestant Reformation, which is October 31st, 1517, culminated with the posting of Martin Luther's 95 Thesis there on the church wall. That's going to lead to the Protestant Reformation, where you have this reorganization of political power being tied to religious authority. So after the Reformation, which once again we will expect you to read about within your textbook and your text and watch several videos on and all that kind of good stuff, after Europe, the reorganization and the shuffling here of religion cannot be underscored. Look at this map and you can see the overlap here of Western Catholicism, once again mainly in mainland Europe, and then to the north you've got the Church of England, right, the Anglican Church. You've got different breakaways of the Protestant Church like Calvinism, which is going to be important in certain areas, Lutheranism, which is heavily dominated in the Holy Roman Empire in places to the north. You've got the Eastern Orthodox Church in Russia, so who knows what they're doing over there. You've got Islam still in Anatolia and modern-day Greece and stuff, kind of meshing together with, the Eastern Orthodox religion. And so a bunch of hodgepodge religions getting thrown into the European bowl there are kind of getting shuffled around, and it's going to be very important to look at because we know what's coming. There's major war coming, religiously centered war, and that's a big deal. Final slide here for today talks about political trends, moving on from the Dutch and the English with their maritime importance and empire building and economic importance and social changes. You've got political developments. So look at SPICE, right? Political developments. 3, in fact, major political developments. Number 1, the rise of the nation state. And there's the definition for you there. Autonomous state inhabited predominantly by a people sharing a common culture, history, and language, political unit type of there. You see the rise, number 2, of the absolute monarchy. Monarchs serve as the, in italics, source of power in the state and is not legally bound by any constitution. Once again, we see a lot of this in the European powers of Spain, France, Russia. You kind of get the converse there with the third development, which is the rise of a limited monarchy. And what's the limitation? The limitation typically is parliament. In England and the Netherlands, which was your focus for today, we see that parliamentary monarchs or constitutional monarchs are the prevailing wisdom here for politics. Your monarch is your head of state, with certain powers being limited from them by a parliament, a large body of people who make up most of the decisions, or a constitution. In England, that occurred in 1215 when they signed the Magna Carta. The king's power has been checked ever since, right, with a parliament. In the Netherlands world, we know that your federation in that policy moving forward from the Holy Roman Empire is what leads to that. So all of that today for you there, 4.1 I should say, and 4.3, looking at England and the Dutch. Use those details from today's PowerPoint to kind of merge in with your other empire building notes that you have, and really focus on setting these 2 empires aside from Spain and Portugal as your major 4 empires of the time period in Europe. And then, of course, we're going to start adding other land-based empires and gunpowder empires to this discussion. So when it comes to sea-based empires, maritime empires, England and the Dutch are important and linked heavily through several different themes of ideologies.